Thank you, Tim. David Solnit here. I'm in Richmond, about half a mile from our local oil refinery in California, US. Super excited to get to collaborate with Emily and Tim, and thank you so much, Dana, for keeping our tech going. Very excited to collaborate with everyone here. And I'm at a climate justice arts project studio right now where we do a lot of screen printing and banner painting. So I'll just do a turnaround, and Gemma, who's another street muralist, is there preparing flags for some frontline folks. And Emily, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll see if Dana will cue up the first slide?
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited to be here with you all. I think this is the first time I've done an international workshop. Usually my geographic scope is pretty limited to where I live, which is on the west coast of Canada. I'm on unceded Lekwungen and Husainich territories here right now. I don't have an interesting space, so I won't show you around, but I have some things on my flip chart. And my pronouns are she and her, I should also mention. I think that's about it. Yeah, glad to be here.
And to follow Emily's example, David, he, him, and in Richmond, California, on traditional Ohlone land. And I just wanted to share a little bit of pictures about how we've ended up using street murals as part of our movements practice here, and as have others around the world. If you want to go back one, Dana, thanks. And I think humans have always decorated and told our stories visually in the spaces around us, whether it's walls, the things in our house, and also the ground, from sand paintings to flower paintings and doorways around the world. But about nine years ago, during the Occupy movement, we started experimenting with using street muraling, mass participatory street muraling. And so the image you see is on Montgomery Street in San Francisco, which is what's nicknamed Wall Street West. It's where all the stock exchange and the big banks headquarters are. And so it says rise up 99%. But we shut down the main street in San Francisco with unions and community groups and the Occupy movement at the time. 10,000 of us at that time were being forced out of our houses through the economic collapse and the predatory banking practices. And so we just chalked out this image, and it was the first time we tried it. And we did a little theater. You can see there's a CEO type that says 1%. And so when we completed 99% rise up, we actually got to practice toppling the 1%, and you can see the ropes, and we pulled them over. So if you do the next slide, Dana. So we started to pick that up. This is about half a mile from where I'm from. It's the Richmond Chevron refinery. It's the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in California. It's been here for over 100 years, longer than the city. So it's historically been a company town. But in 2012, on August 6th, the refinery went on fire. They're too cheap to shut it off, and they're trying to keep producing oil without actually doing safety. And so it caught on fire. 15,000 local residents went to the hospital with respiratory and other problems. And so on the 1-year anniversary, you want to go next, Dana? The 1-year anniversary, thousands of us marched to the front gate of the refinery. 200 people were arrested sitting in and blockading the refinery. And as we did that, we painted a giant sunflower to help blockade the main entrance. And sunflowers remove toxins from the soil. So that's what we were trying to do, was remove toxins from our community, the toxins of Chevron. But it's amazing that we had maybe 100 people painting. It really helped hold the space, which we were shutting down and occupying, and was something that all different kinds of people could plug into. And next. And this is the crew of artists that laid it out and led it. But we also, the goal was to see how many people would get painting, and we had over 100 people painting that day. Next. This is at Standing Rock in North Dakota, where people are trying to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is an ongoing struggle, and we will eventually stop it. And one of the things that came from that movement to stop that pipeline was bank divestment. And you can see the flag in the middle has a thunderbird, the same one Emily's wearing on her shirt, which is an indigenous, it's the spirit and being when there's a thunderstorm. Next. And so that became a really powerful image in those movements. So we worked with Idle No More SF Bay, indigenous grandma-led group. And we went to Wells Fargo's world headquarters and painted a giant 35-foot Thunderbird on the entrance. We blockaded the streets, shut it down, and had a couple of visiting artists, Isaac Murdoch and Christy Belcourt. Isaac sort of drew the first one. Next. And so we really found it a powerful practice to shut down, take over public space and create something beautiful together in it. So when our governor of California, former Governor Jerry Brown, decided to host a global climate summit, mostly of people who are contributing to the problem, we decided to really ramp up that practice. And so we decided we were going to take over 5 blocks of city around City Hall and do it guerrilla style. So a group of grandmothers formed called the Society of Fearless Grandmothers, and they physically shut down all the streets to traffic so that we got over 50 community groups to each design their own 25-foot or was that 7-meter mural. Next. And there they are shutting down the street. Next. And so we chalked out the circles for them, and then we did that triangular pattern, which is a Native American, California Native basket designed by local indigenous artist Ed Willie. And we really took over all those blocks and had thousands of people painting that day, and 50 groups, and each one of them had been asked, what's your solution to climate chaos and injustice? Next. You can see the high level of participation. Next. And I think our takeaway from this practice, here you can see an aerial view, is that what we love about street murals and street painting is that it reclaims our public space from cars and capital, and it also can be a way of beautifully escalating our actions and holding our space while having a constructive thing to do, and that it's really a constructive creation in the face of the destructive climate chaos and corporate capitalism. We also love how participatory they are, and how many people can get involved in designing, planning, and actually physically painting. When we've gotten construction workers and office workers helping to paint them spontaneously there. And the last thing is that in terms of winning our struggles, we believe that people understand the world through stories, and that arts and all the different forms of arts are how people tell stories. And an artist organizer from Minneapolis, Ricardo Levins Morales, explains it really well. He says, humans are story driven. We make choices according to how we understand the world to be. And that art speaks directly to those deep inner spaces where the stories are stored. I use art to support people's ability to believe in possibilities that go beyond the boundaries that are acceptable to the rulers. Next. And so supporting the climate strike last, what was that, 2 years ago, we planned another one along what we call Wall Street West. Next. And again, we invited all the different groups to design their own. The grandmothers led shutting down the streets. And we also did it in conjunction with a direct action while we were occupying the street, designing and painting murals and inviting the community to help us. Different affinity groups were shutting down every bank in that part of the financial district and physically blockading them or doing sit-ins. Next. And we did a little kind of like a mural guide. So we actually had each group write a little bit about their mural, and we handed out maps and posted maps. So the street, which is usually quite dangerous with fast moving traffic, became a sort of a festival. And a lot of people from the community and financial district workers and construction workers came out and joined us. Next. 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 Just go pretty quickly here. A positive local article. Next. And street muraling has really spread to a lot of our different movements. These are McDonald's workers on strike who were denied PPE and sick time off. So they shut down their McDonald's through a worker strike for 6 weeks in Oakland, California. Next. Next. Also spread around the world. This is a street mural in Brazil done by Families for Future and street artist Mondano and friends. Next. Next. And I think I've got one more. Next. Actually, a couple more. And this is during your climate strike last year in Berlin for those folks in Europe, done by Fridays for Future. Next. And this was one done in Montreal, Canada at an iconic park visible from a distance. And super excited that Emily, who's been leading amazing street murals in British Columbia, Canada, is able to join us. So if you want to go to the next slide, then Emily.
Yeah, I just have a few examples of some of the murals I've done in this section. This was my very first street mural ever. It actually happened because the person who was originally going to lead it got sick, and last minute somebody asked me like, "Hey, do you want to paint the street mural?" So that was fun. And it was in front of what was then the Kinder Morgan tanker terminal in Burnaby. There was a proposal that's still under construction now to double the capacity of this oil pipeline that was taking oil from the tar sands to the coast, and was provoking massive resistance. So this was painting a street mural like right outside those gates, those industrial gates, which was one thing I learned from this mural is we didn't have any good vantage point to take photos of it. And so in the future, I should have always have ladders or something like that. You can go to the next slide. This was a mural painted during that really big 2019 global climate strike in September. And this one was really thrilling because this is the main intersection, the busiest intersection in downtown Victoria where I live. And there were 20,000 people at this march. And as we started, the mural team was kind of parked out, just like waiting on the sidewalk. And as we saw these 20,000 people start marching down the street and the lights changed to block traffic, we ran out into the intersection and started drawing our circles because our hope was that we would get the circles down right before people came and then tell people to, line up around the outside of the mural and outline and then got people painting. But often when I'm doing street murals, I do it as part of an event someone else has already organized. So you need those 100 people to show up in the street to kind of give you like the social license to block the street and block the street so that you can paint a mural in the middle. Go to the next one. This was a mural that happened in February 2020, which was when Wet'suwet'en people in northern BC started to blockade Coastal GasLink, which is a company building a gas pipeline through their territory without consent. And they really put up a big stand saying that they were not going to permit this company to construct there anymore. And then the RCMP, which is kind of Canada's historic police force, was going in and arresting these folks on their own territory. And on this day, they had just arrested Frida Hewson, who's one of the most important matriarchs, and as well as a couple of other matriarchs too. And it was this day when everyone was feeling really angry and really heavy. We are, where I live, it's the provincial capital of BC, so we're kind of at the point of decision, the point where the politicians making the decisions to not call off the police are located. And we had this youth occupying the legislature.
Emily, I don't think it's just me because I can see David moving, but we're losing you right now.
Here.
We lost like the last minute of you, Emily, I'm afraid.
We ended up painting this spontaneous mural in the middle of a major bridge.
And
I'm sorry, my internet cut out. What was the last bit that you heard?
spontaneous painting of the bridge.
Okay, I think everything I said got recorded. Okay, yeah, we can go to the next slide. This design even happened spontaneously. It just happened to be the paint that we had, and some folks who were Coast Salish, who are the Indigenous folks here, were painting these crescent shapes at the bottom. I still don't know who it was, but they were adding something from local Indigenous art, which was really cool. And I talked to many people that said this was like one of the things that cheered them up on this day that was feeling like really dark and heavy, which is another thing that street murals can bring, is just like joy and lightness to dealing with topics that are often so full of grief. I think that was all oh, I had one more. This is the most recent mural I painted, which was, this art is by my friend Sarah Jim, who's a local Indigenous artist, and came up with this like really powerful design. And we painted this at a police detachment to protest police brutality in the forest, where people are currently blockading old growth logging. Just want to show that as my most recent example.
Ready to move on to where to paint, Emily?
Sure. Or are we pausing for questions now? Or are we moving on? We can move on.
I think
there was just one question. There was just one question, or two questions actually, that came up regarding location. And given that we're ahead of schedule, maybe we can take them now.
Sure.
Pat, you had a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask?
Yeah, I just, and maybe you already answered my question, but I was curious if you've got permits in order to close the streets, or if you are just using masses of people in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, that is what we're going to get into in the next section. I think in my experience, I don't think I have ever had a permit for any of the murals in these photos. So yeah, basically we're using just the numbers of people in the streets as protection for ourselves.
And this is, we'll talk more about that later, but we also acknowledge that every city and every group is very different. So it's something that each group has to navigate. So some groups get permission, definitely. Some groups do it in places where they know they won't get messed with by the authorities. We've gotten more political space to do it in the Bay Area, but we initially treated it like a civil disobedience, where we had people who were prepared to blockade streets. The first people out painting were people who were willing to take a risk of arrest. And, you know, we've sort of, through many years of struggle in San Francisco, we won the space to hold the streets without a permit, but we also know that in other cities, that's not the case. So that's part of what every group has to navigate. And We're going to talk about different types of murals that elicit different responses from authorities as one option, and also location. And then later on, we'll go through all the different roles that you need to do to keep your folks safe.
And the other question in the document, David and Emily, was about location. So I think you can move on to that section.
Okay. We do a next slide, Dana. Start off, which is just, I mean, a huge decision is thinking about where to paint it. And I mean, the most obvious place for those of us doing defunding or disruptive work is to actually do it in front of the place that you're protesting. So that works sometimes. So here we are in front of Wells Fargo World Headquarters, where we did a block-long mural. And then the New York Times covers actually during our US elections, where there was a huge attempt to steal the election. We went outside the law firm representing Trump and painted a block-long mural saying Jones Day, hands off our ballots, count every vote. And so that the fact that we did it right at their office helped get a lot of coverage, and eventually got them to quit being Trump's law firm. I'll do the next slide. And do you have anything to add?
Well, my next slide was again it's not there anymore. Anyway, there it is. Is the example of the police station again. I guess I would just add, it can be very cathartic for your people to be painting. I think this one was a cathartic example, but to be painting right outside where you know your target will see it, it's pretty powerful. That's about it.
Next. Other thing often is to think about someplace that's iconic that people are used to seeing. So here we are at San Francisco City Hall, a landmark, or also maybe you want to do it somewhere where there's a lot of people, like a farmer's market or a plaza or a town center. Emily, anything to add? Next slide.
That's about it, yeah.
And then these are a couple slides where we really didn't have the social license. So the first one on the right, you can see we're actually under a bridge, and it's actually sort of a paved river flood area in Napa, California. We are commemorating the 6-month anniversary of the North Bay fire a few years back. And we're working with local partners who didn't want to disobey the authorities. And so this was basically the space that we could get away with doing it. And we'll talk about it more, but we actually brought our own tarps to paint it. So that was a place where the folks we were working with weren't prepared to do it guerrilla style. And then here on the right is Chico Peace and Justice Center. And this is a mural led by a local indigenous artist and basket weaver. But the only place that they thought they could get away with it, they also wanted to do it in conjunction with a music event they were having, was on the sidewalk directly in front of their storefront. And even for that, they got a citation from the city, but we didn't have anyone interfere with it. So those are just, we're aware that not every place can get away with taking over a city. Next slide.
I have one example of this. This was outside the Ministry of Environment building in Victoria for a protest about old growth logging. And you can kind of see the number of people in this photo. We didn't feel like we had enough people to block a road, but luckily there was this open pavement area that was on public property, which was still outside of our target, but the perfect place to paint. So you can kind of keep an eye out for those open public spaces that are great surfaces for painting on.
And next. Another thing Emily mentioned earlier is having visibility, and in two ways. This Sunrise Movement shows this in front of the California State Capitol. It says "Release prisoners, not fossil fuels." It's when we were trying to get the outbreak of COVID amongst prisoners was rampant, so we were demanding that they be released, partnered with let's not release fossil fuels from the ground. But they did it in front of the state capitol, which is sort of very visible spot. but we also did it in a particular place where there was a parking structure where the photographer could stand up there and take a picture. So that's, you know, one of the ways, especially for these ephemeral and tempera and temporary murals, is documentation and having them have an impact in the moment. So that was key, that visibility. So when I look at spaces, I'm always looking as like, where can we document it? Sometimes we bring our own ladders, or more and more of our activist community have been training themselves in using drone to take photo and video. Next. And we're going to talk about the different types of paint. This is in Berkeley, California. There's a sacred shell mound site, a sort of ancestral burial and living site of the Ohlone, who are the original people here. And it's a parking lot now, and there's a big movement throughout the community to try and turn it into a commemoration of the Ohlone culture and their shell mound. But there's also a developer who wants to do luxury housing, so we're having a fight. So outside the shell mound, which you can see the green fences, we did a giant permanent paint street mural. And in this case, the city is actually on our side against the developer. And it says sacred site, has California poppies, and a mural that a little bit tells the story. And we used actually a masonry paint called elastomeric that's lasted pretty well for the last 6 months. So we'll probably go in and retouch it. And we didn't have any pushback from the city, and had the grandmothers once again close down the access to 4th Street in Berkeley. Next, anything to add, Emily?
I just had my one example of a permanent mural I did that was not a protest, but just an example of something you can do with time, and with, I guess, the advantage of having something that is more sanctioned is you have more time. And this was using surface paint that I think is used to do ground markings on sports courts and things like that, and it's turning a parking lot into a basketball court.
Next. And what we usually do is in the Bay Area is use tempera paint, and that's the kind of paint that kids use in school. It's non-toxic, so kids can actually drink it and not get sick, and it can go down the drains and be less toxic than most of our household products. And also clay paint, but these are water soluble, and that's one thing that is able to buy some ability to do it. Is like, okay, it's not permanent, it's children's washable paint, and that's sometimes a negotiating place if the authorities are trying to push us back, together with trying to use people power to hold the space. And this is folks in Seattle outside Liberty Mutual. Next. And one even more de-escalated for authorities is chalk. People are pretty familiar with kids doing chalk murals in places. So folks at Line 3 in northern Minnesota didn't want to either deal with the logistics or were concerned about police response to painting a street mural, so they just chalked it. And a couple notes here is that the black Biden, they used barbecue charcoal instead of trying to find black charcoal, but it's mostly just done with kids sidewalk paint, sidewalk chalk. And then the one thing they did that it looks pretty smooth, it actually looks like paint, is they took buckets of water and big brushes and they brushed it smooth, so it sort of filled up, so it doesn't have that usual chalk texture. It's really quite solid and impressive. Next. And I'll just note that we're going to give you a link to a manual, and everything we're saying is actually in there, so don't stress out if you're a note-taking type of person. It's a 20-page manual with lots of pictures, many of them these pictures, and lots of tips and steps. But this is the last one. Is I mentioned in Napa, California, the city and the police couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that someone could do a tempera mural on public property, and the group we were working with wasn't up for being disobedient. So we found a solution, and we actually sewed together a giant tarp, primed it with paint so it wouldn't soak through. And one advantage to that is that it actually got used repeatedly, and that we got to walk away with it, because one of the things with tempera and clay murals is they're ephemeral, as you know, all chalk art is. It goes away with the rain or when people hose it down. Next.
Here's one example I have of painting a banner at an event. This was right on the steps of the provincial legislature, where there are tons of security guards, and we didn't really, it wasn't the kind of event where you're doing a civil disobedience kind of thing. But it worked really well to be painting this banner while there were speakers at a rally, and it was just something else for people to do other than standing and listening to speakers. And then we also took this banner and used it for a banner drop off a bridge a couple of weeks later.
And next.
This is not a slide for this section, although it's an example of a design for a street mural. I think we're doing question time.
Yeah, let's take some questions on location or anything that's come up so far. Anyone got anything? I'm just looking in the document, actually.
Do you want to go back a couple of slides, Dana? Thank you. One more. Perfect.
Feel free to come off mute and ask if you have a question.
I was just curious about the hanging the banner from a bridge. You know, I'd love to do that over some of our freeways during rush hour, but I don't know what the legal aspect is of that. I mean, I would certainly hate it if anything fell. Any advice or thoughts on that?
I think one easy way is if you just have people standing holding the banner. You could tie it on well too, and have people there, and that way, you know, no one can confiscate it. So you make sure you hold on to it, and then you can reuse it. I guess another method is just to like tie it on and then leave it there, but then you probably won't be able to keep it. But if there are people there with the banner, you shouldn't get into any trouble, I think. Do you have any advice, David?
No. And there's nothing else on that. We have a question from Isabel, who actually I showed the mural in Montreal. She led that mural around the Green New Deal and a whole wave of murals across Canada before the election around the Green New Deal. So maybe we can unmute her.
Hi, David, and hi, everyone. I'm super happy to see you again. And I don't know if my internet connection is okay enough for folks to understand me. Can you put a thumbs up if it's okay enough, or else I can write down my question? It's
good. Go.
Good. Okay, perfect. So what I was wondering is because the concept complex.
You should write your question. We're losing you in and out.
Okay.
But
I'll write my question.
Great to hear from you, Isabel, and thank you for all the rich examples across Canada. And Isabel, I worked with her. We did a training for trainers, so we trained people how to lead street murals, and they did trainings all across Canada to get community groups to do them for the Green New Deal.
And whilst we wait for Isabel to type, Smith, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, team, for this opportunity. I just want to appreciate all that you've been doing and everywhere.
The internet doesn't want questions tonight.
Right. It cuts people off just when they get to their question.
It's crystal clear until people start asking questions. Smith, we lost you, I'm afraid. Maybe you have to go into the document as well. Oh, let's see.
Okay. I should go ahead.
Oh,
Or
I think you might be back.
Try-
Smith. I think you might be back.
Try-
Smith.
Have another go, Smith.
so let-
See if it works.
okay. All right. So let me drop my question right on the chat box.
While Smith writes his question, anyone else?
We have Isabel's question. So Isabel's saying, in a political context where the authorities do not approve street murals and it's done in a disobedient occupation way, do you have experiences outside of San Francisco where groups were still successful in making it happen and not being blocked?
Yes. People have done it in Washington, D.C., in Seattle, Vermont. I could, if I thought about it, I could probably come up with a dozen cities. And in some cities, it is more like a disobedience where you have to physically protect the space. People have to be prepared for a risk of arrest. And we've often done street murals where we thought there might be a risk of arrest, and we've often had people who are willing to take a risk of arrest be the first ones to go in there and start chalking it out. And then when it feels safe, we've told other folks about it. And also had people who are willing to block traffic and hold their ground. And so we, in San Francisco, we've also had confrontations where the police, where they've attempted to move us, but through police liaisons and persistence. And honestly, there's a dynamic that shifts if you're able to really get people painting almost immediately. We sometimes keep our paint less visible, chalk things, and then within a few minutes, we'll have the first word and we'll get as many people painting as possible. And as soon as there's, 25 people doing an art project in the street and the police liaison says it's washable paint and we're not going to move, that often helps back them off. But I know that's not every city and every country are different.
Bill had a good point in the chat, which is to ask people in your community who have done actions that are maybe as similar as possible for their advice, because every area is different.
I wonder, Bill, if you can talk about any of the DC murals and how folks did that.
Yeah, in DC, we deal with this different ways. Once we did another mural that was smaller, but all the police went and shut that down. And while they were busy with that, the main mural that we really wanted to do, we made that happen. So sometimes it's distracting them. Sometimes it's doing it like really early in the morning, like 3 a.m. Sometimes it's just being fast.
And so it's also something you want to think about with your design. And when we did that Thunderbird, we actually used a stencil because we were able to trace it in about 2 minutes and have people immediately start painting in large numbers. And that really helped. Other questions? Thank you, Bill. Pat's asking, how long does it take? And I'll let others jump in, but that's something to think about. And also by the end of this session, we're going to try and convince everybody to do a practice mural somewhere safe, like a driveway or parking lot or sidewalk. But how big you do it, how complicated it is, and whether or not you've practiced, how many people you have, those are all variables. There's some things, if your goal is speed, Gemma and I will demonstrate, but there's some things, bigger brushes, rollers, that kind of thing. And we'll go through the physical painting of it. How are we on time, Emily?
We're good. We're slightly ahead. I found like an hour and a half is often, like if you just need an estimate, that can be a good estimate.
We're doing we're doing a block-long mural outside of BlackRock's world headquarters, and we're actually allowing for 4 hours because we're going to
Right.
paint an entire block and have 15 different community groups do murals.
Depends on the size. Yeah.
So should we move on?
Go for it.
Sure. We're going to talk about design and painting and like the meat of it now. We were not going to have slides for this part, so I guess we could close the slides. Well, we can close the slides for now, and then we have some slides at the end. But we have stuff to show you. So I'll talk, and then I think David has some examples of things to hold up. If you change your Zoom settings also to speaker view, which is in the top right hand, you might be able to see some of the things a little bit bigger. Cool. So for planning your design, you have a couple of different options. One way you can do it is to get one person, maybe a local artist, and if you have money, ideally you could pay them, or if you don't have any budget, you could just enlist them to do it for free, and get your group to sort of come up with a brief for them of saying, like, we want to design about this, and ask them to come up with it. Sometimes it works really well if it's like an Indigenous artist or an artist from an affected community. Another way you can do it is to have your group kind of sit down together at a workshop and collectively come up with different designs. So for example, everyone could draw something within a circle about a certain prompt. And then everyone can put their designs on the table. As a group, you can decide which ones that you like the best and then take your favorite elements and combine them. David, do you have any of those examples of sketches from street murals?
I do. And sorry, I'm outside now.
Great.
Sorry for the ambient sound, but just a few examples. This was a sunrise mural. You can see they used the pie slice to divide it. The other key thing is that they taped it on a piece of cardboard so it wouldn't blow away or get soaked in paint.
Yeah, taping it on cardboard or a clipboard is a good idea because wind exists.
Here's one we did in front of the Chevron refinery. And one thing we did here is we actually went to Google Earth and we blew up an aerial view and then sort of dropped the images on there to help us figure out where to locate them. Here's one we did around demands for paid childcare with a parents group in Oakland. And so we sort of, we roughed it out. It's a computer printout and there we put it on a clipboard.
Nice. Here's one. This is an original sketch I did for a divestment mural that I then scanned in. And I feel like I've recycled a lot of mine, which I now regret because they get like paint and stuff on them and they end up kind of gross by the end. I was like, I'm not going to keep these, but next time I will. Here's one more. This was for the basketball court drawing I did, and you can kind of see it has all these measurement marks on it. Some tips that we have for designs are, I find if you can stick to like 4 or 5 words and 4 or 5 colors, that can work really well. So trying to have your group be like concise, because number one, it can be more powerful, and number two, it'll be faster to paint. If you're using colors, think about the contrast, think about the color of the pavement. So if you have like dark pavement, for example, you might want to have a white background that'll stand out against it. Often using, you know, kind of bold primary colors like black, white, red, and yellow and blue, or like black, yellow, green, and red, or something like that. Some of those kind of basic color combinations often works really well. One of David's suggestions was to use words from songs or poems, perhaps, which can be more unique than just writing maybe what your demand is. Yeah, that was about all I had for those. David, any other design tips or anyone else want to add something? Add any art tips?
just a couple things I would challenge. This is I spoke earlier about how art is a way to tell stories, and so I would challenge us to try and use images and not just slogans, but think about what images can really connect with people, connect across different cultures, across the community. And also when thinking about what words to use, I often look to poets, songwriters, and sometimes use lyrics like the mural right here says, which is actually from a song, when we stop the flow of money, then we stop the flow of oil, which I think is a lot more powerful and evocative than, you know, a stop fossil fuel investments. You know, so let's get our poets and singers and writers out and not and let our policy wonks and administrators lead on the important stuff that they do, but not on the language we try and inspire people with.
100%. Get your policy wonks out of your slogan meeting and they can come. When you're thinking about sort of the logistics of your design, you can actually measure your street. Oh, my flip chart paper's falling over, but maybe if your street is like this, you might want to leave a little bit of room at these corners for people to walk through. But within that, you know, the bigger, I've sometimes painted murals that I regretted not making them bigger. And often, you know, the bigger you can paint it, the more of like a wow effect that it'll have in photos. Another thing is that you can think about the orientation of your building. So if you have like, if you have like your bank here, then you might want to have your mural with the text facing like away from the bank or whatever target it is. So that way in the photo, you'll have your building in the background with your mural here. And then when you take a photo of it, you also want to think of positioning all your people to be kind of circling around behind your mural. So then you get like the mural, the people, and your target all in the same photo. One other note is that you can use stencils, I think like David mentioned. And I have an example of that in some of the slides coming up, but use stencils to get your design onto the ground more quickly if you have something complex to draw. David, do you want to talk about supplies? I'm excited for this part.
Talk about supplies.
Supplies.
We're going to start. I'll just start with some of the murals, and we'll try and do really quick demonstrations. Let me actually plug my ear in. Maybe that will help. Can folks hear me okay? Good. So he is sidewalk chalk. And then we also use blackboard chalk to do more details. So we can do big things. We actually make a, want to grab one of the chalk sticks? We create chalk sticks. And this is, we usually use correctly sized bamboo. Gemma here. So Gemma's going to hold that up. So it's just bamboo, and you can either tape it or use a rubber band. And then this is another model where I just used a broom handle and 3 small sticks, and it stays in pretty firm. And so that allows you to paint standing up. And we're going to show a marking center.
I just tilted it down.
Okay. We're going to demonstrate doing a human compass.
So you can use this human compass to make circles, which is one of sort of the easiest ways to make a clean outline for your mural. So you have one person holding the string steady in the middle, and then you have your second person walking in a circle around the outside, and you want to pull the string taut so that the distance stays consistent all the way around. And then when you adjust the length of the string to make it shorter, for example, you can make smaller circles on the inside.
And maybe while we're on chalk, I can show a little bit of a Gemma setup to do some letters for design. Talk here, Gemma. Say what you've done. Let me make sure that's visible.
So this is just a rectangle that I'm gonna put a 6-letter word inside of. And so I've marked off my midpoint in my rectangle and then equally spaced little squares to put each letter in to make them about the same size. And I'm gonna use the guidelines from the top and the bottom of the rectangle so that my letters are all the same height and generally the same width. And that way it's gonna look as good as possible. So I've started with the D.
I usually do these as in-person workshops, so this would be the part where we would hand you all a chalk stick and have you start doing layout. And you also have the option of using a stick or a ruler if you're not feeling confident about your straight lines. But having the spacing and the boxes really helps. You've got a top, a bottom, and you know how big your letter is, so it really makes the letters look cleaner.
And if you goof up, it's nice to have multiple colors of chalk so that you can go back over and really make your lines clean before you go in with your paint.
Just gonna walk through some of the supplies. And so a variety of different kinds of brushes. We'll talk a little bit in painting tips about advantages of different brushes, but smaller ones for detail. These are a 4-inch. Sometimes you can get significantly larger ones, which if you're really covering a lot of area, and these ones are actually fit onto poles, so those folks can paint standing up out of a bucket. But these are, and then on to rollers. There's bigger rollers, which you can get different thicknesses of sleeves on them. And then sometimes people prefer smaller ones for detail. If there's a lot of people and you're not in a super hurry, I like the tactile and the participatory nature of brushes. I think you can get more folks involved and it takes a little bit less skill. And so that just model a roller. So I could have this on a broomstick, but if I were going right to the edge, I might go here and then get the actual edge with the brush. And that's one consideration with paint is one of the issues we have a lot is if people put it on pretty heavy, which is their instinct, that might take two hours to dry. But if I brush it out, and the other thing is the thickness, is that this is a nice consistency. I like it so it will dry quickly, as thin as possible, but you don't want it so thin that it doesn't cover the surface and this color is weak. So I'm always trying to, and different paints are different. And I'll just walk through the rest of the supplies. I mentioned the clay paint. We get a clay powder, soak it in water and mix it up. But you can also take ceramic clay, cut it up with a wire like this, leave it out to dry, crush it, soak it, and then turn it into this type of a clay, and you can get the different colors of clay. And I'm just showing off that in California and also a group in Brazil, we're gathering ashes from the wildfires and also charcoal from burned trees and making a paint out of it. So this is the ash paint. I'll just do a little sample here. It's a gray and especially on a black top. And I think we're probably going to paint a lot of the block like that. And then this is so we took this charcoal, we crushed it kind of like a giant mortar and pestle with a big a board. So it became this dust. And then I created a cornstarch wheat paste, which I'll share the recipe of, but 2 parts cornstarch to 1 part of the powdered charcoal or powdered ash. And this is actually an incredibly vivid black. So we'll be using that. But also encourage people to think about if they're in areas that flooded, maybe they want to use mud from that. And we can keep walking over here and see our paint setups. When we're doing a big mural, we often will pre-mix the paint into buckets. And then these are our sloppy scoops. Emily has slightly cleaner ladles that she uses. But then if we don't have the containers here, but then we can pour this into the containers, and we'll often set up brushes and containers with the paint ready to go. And then when we're done, we can just scoop it back in, put a lid on it, and we're ready to go. So these are the different colors. They tend to separate, so we have to stir them each time. And then when we're done, we scrape off as much paint as we can, stick all the brushes and containers in a box, a bag, or if you look over here, for some of our bigger ones, we've actually found parts. We also always have a supply of water to either wash up mistakes or further thin the paint. And we also bring a lot of rags. Here we go. Cloth rags or old towels are best. And lots of, we get donations of recycled containers to pour the paint into. I think that's pretty good on supplies. I'm gonna take us back inside.
Someone asked a really good question about circles over squares for the design. Do you want to touch on that?
Circles are easier than squares. It's very hard to draw a square because you have to get even the angles right. So you could draw like a wonky quadrangle, but a circle can just turn out perfect more easily. Do you want to add to that, David?
Yeah, we actually use string to draw straight lines. So it's really, we like the circle because you can gather around them. It's a simple shape. It's a little bit less surface area than a square, but they're gonna pull a string tight, and I'll put my foot on one end of it. And then Gemma will get a chalk stick. And so we're pulling so that's a really quick way to get a straight line. You could also get a long stick, but that way you could, and together with a measuring tape, you could actually get your square and create a grid. So the circle method where we do a circle and then a pie slice, and then we would do concentric circles to help lay it out. It's basically a circle version of a square grid, but it's a little bit quicker. Gonna bring us back inside?
I can do a demo of that while you guys walk. So you have your, sorry that my flip chart's a bit angled, but you have your outside circle here. And so then you'd like shorten your string a little bit and draw the inside circle. And then you lay out your letters. And so on your design, on your sheet of paper, you want to count out how many letters you have, including the space, remember the space. And then you can kind of divide up how much space you have. I'm not sure how many spaces this is going to be, but let's say it was like defund. So then you have the top of your letter touching the top of the circle and the bottom of your letter touching the bottom of the circle. So on your design, you want to count out like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then you know that, now this example doesn't look very good, but you would know that this between the 7 and 8 here is your center point that you could mark out. And then you could draw another circle in here, which could mark the edge of your design. So you leave a bit of a buffer. And then, I don't know, if you have a flower, that you could draw it like to the edge of this inner circle here. The general idea. I could also show, I've been experimenting with this paint that is made from pigments that are used to color clay, which are, just a bit more of a natural material than tempera. So this one is red iron oxide, and this one is burnt umber. The burnt umber makes like a really beautiful yellow. That's that one. And then I think this red iron oxide is kind of a similar color to the red clay. It's like very vibrant red, and then it dries a bit more dull. And you can also make a black with this, a really black with black iron oxide. And that you just mix you get the dry pigment and you mix it with water. Another tip for painting is that you're going to have and be inviting, dozens of people to help paint. And so you might want to put like little X's in each area to represent that that area should be filled with a certain color. What else, David? I feel like we did that all out of order, but yeah, maybe questions.
I've got a question about the pie system. Could you say a bit more about that, perhaps?
Jump in on that. Just show a few different. You can see for this one, they used this was a Filipino community doing a mural at the Philippine consulate against dictator Duterte. But we actually did a series of 4 circles here, the outer ring, and then we did a smaller inner one like that, and that helped us locate these letters and they had perfect top and bottom lines. And then let me find one of the other ones that actually used where are we? So you could a little bit see here that they actually drew a line here and here, and that really helps you locate it. This one, they actually did quite a few. So these lines will, that this U goes right in that spot, and you could even do additional concentric circles if that helps. Like they did them here to locate these letters. So that's the pie. And in the manual, there's a sort of a generic template that you could use, just that sort of visually explains it. And So
David, did you talk about cleanup? I guess you did talk about that.
I did a little bit, and then thinking about how you're going to transport, I sometimes bring either trash bags if it's quite messy or it has to go into a car, boxes or bags to carry, and organize a cleanup party at a later date with lots of buckets to wash the brushes out of.
Pat is asking about templates. I have a stencil that I left somewhere. I might try to find it if there's a break. Is that what you mean, Pat? Like making stencils?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about using a stencil in order to kind of speed up getting it down on the street. And I was just curious what kind of materials you are using and how that works, because it seems like it's huge.
Talk a little bit about that. Aaron just volunteered. You can, I try and find a heavy roll of paper. I use it's called red rosin. In the US they use it to line floors when they're doing construction. You can get it at a hardware store, but just looking for working, you get a lot of somewhat heavy paper. So if it's windy or weathery, it doesn't crinkle too much. And then I lay it out. When we did the Thunderbird in front of the Wells Fargo, we had, I think we had a 30-foot template, and we just taped a big sheet together and we sort of drew it out where we had a few hours to make it look right, because we weren't confident that we could make it look right freehanding it, even with a grid. And we also it had a belt buckle and some decorations, so we would cut little slits in there so we could make the chalk marks. So when we got there, we sort of did our perimeter line and were able to place that thing down, and everyone just traced. A bunch of people held it down. We traced around it, pulled it up, and in under 5 minutes we were starting to paint it. So I would encourage people to practice and get some very doable skills for anyone to be able to rough out shapes. But also, if you get a complicated one, and especially if time is a factor, that can really make it more relaxing to either project and trace, or to sketch it out and trace, and then bring it and fold it and chalk it out.
I knew I had to make a whole bunch of salmon for a mural, and salmon are not that easy to draw. So I made this stencil out of floor linoleum, because it was just, I had some extra floor linoleum. And I made the mistake of rolling this, and that kind of messed up my stencil a little bit. So I try to keep them flat. But we just used this and actually just painted straight underneath it. And the nice thing about linoleum is it's very hardy, so you could reuse these. I had some examples, some slides showing the process of a mural that was really well documented, start to finish. So we could put those up. I guess, Dana, if you could bring our slideshow back. It's the next one, I think. There we go. So this is a mural I did I helped to facilitate for Divest UVic, the campaign to try to get the University of Victoria to stop investing in fossil fuels. And so in this case, I think there was quite a short timeline. It was also around exam season. So instead of having all of the students come together to come up with the design, they wanted me to just come up with a few design options and then send it to them. So on one side, there are all the different options I gave them. And then on the other side, there's the final example that the students picked. It has like my markings on it, showing a little bit of a grid and numbering out how many letters there are. Go to the next one. So this shows us doing the outlining with that bamboo stick with chalk on the end. Next slide. There's starting to paint in the letters. it can be helpful to start lettering or start outlining the letters first, and then you can get people to start painting the letters. And while they're doing that, the outlining team can work on the images in the middle. Next slide. There's just some photos of our supply table. And so I got these ladles. I think this was a tip from Greenpeace. I got 4 ladles from the thrift store, which can be handy for not getting paint all over your hands when you're scooping the paint from the big bucket into the yogurt container. And there's just our chalk and buckets and design on a clipboard. Next slide. There's an example of the salmon stencil being used. Next one. It's just everyone painting. This was during a quite high COVID time, so we did maybe a smaller mural with fewer people than we otherwise would have. But a street mural is something that it is a kind of action you can do during COVID more easily than, you know, having a really big rally, for example. Next slide. And there's the final example. So we managed to get, the first one is a shot from a photographer. I don't think he used a ladder, but he just managed to get a pretty good angle by himself and with the lens he was using. And then the one in the top corner is a drone shot. And then the one in the bottom corner is taken from a window. That just shows what the process looks like. Yeah, are there any more questions about layout and painting and all of that stuff?
Well, we've got this slide up. Also, just point out the light dark contrast is really key to make it visible.
Yeah.
So notice that on the light colors, the light blue and the white, there's black lettering, and on the black dark background, there's white lettering, and so that really makes it pop. Whereas even if you have different colors like orange and blue, if they're the same darkness, it doesn't jump quite as much.
Yeah. Corinne is asking, do you find there's a limit to how hot or cold it can be outside for the paint to take to the pavement? I would say for permanent murals, you would want to do that in the summer, but for these temporary murals, they're going to wash off anyway. So as long as it will literally stick to the ground, so the ground is dry enough that you can paint on it, it should be okay. But then again, where I live, it doesn't get super cold. So I don't know if you have anyone else has something to add to that.
We did one with Extinction Rebellion locally when it was, it had been drizzling and the ground was wet, but it wasn't actively raining and it wasn't puddled. So we were actually able to do a mural that was visible, worked even with a wet road, you know. And then in the summer heat, sort of the limitation is if it's really too hot. And one thing I forgot to mention in supplies is we often will get pieces of cardboard and cut them so people have a thing to kneel on, both to keep themselves clean and also to protect their knees, or else sometimes we get yoga mats and cut them into chunks, and that can really help so people can kneel comfortably, especially those of us who are not young. The other thing we then use the cardboard for is, as your mural fills in, how do people get in and out of different spaces to finish? And so we create little stepping stones, or sometimes we'll even say, let's leave a pathway in and out of the mural before you paint. And so we'll actually maybe even chalk a strip and say, this is our pathway in and out, and then the last person will paint their way out.
Isabel was asking how much time did it take for this mural, the divestment one, and the number of people. I would say we probably had 15 or 20 throughout the day, but maybe only 10 painting at one time. So it took a bit longer than others have done in the past. I think it took about 2.5 hours. With murals where there are kind of unlimited numbers of people painting that are this size, I found it would take more like an hour and a half, but this one was about 2.5. And maybe 3 hours, including like setup and photography and everything.
We've often had, for community murals, we've often had more people than there is space to paint. So we sometimes rotate people out so everyone can get their hands in it, and tell folks, if you've been painting for half an hour, maybe step back and let someone else jump in. Partly with COVID, trying to keep a little bit of space, but also make it so the space is workable. Also, sometimes with younger kids, we'll partner them with an adult. And then also we look for people who are a little bit more OCD and can do clean edges, put them on that. And then sometimes they can work together with someone who's good at filling an area. So also the role of a paint facilitator. And we're about to jump into talking about the different roles that we set up in advance. Do you
There's
want
just one question in the document about how expensive is the paid?
US centric here, I apologize, but we get gallons, which is almost 4 liters of tempera paint. At an educational store, they're about $15 a gallon. At an art supply store, they're anywhere from $20 to $30 a gallon. So I would, most art supply stores carry tempera paint. You're looking for larger quantities and do a little research, but also check out either children's or educational resource stores that might be supplies for teachers or schools. And then there's also again, the option of making some of your colors out of clay or other things yourself.
I have a question. How do you recruit your core painters? Actually, first of all, Isabel asked what size was it about this divestment mural. It was 14 feet in diameter. It wasn't super big because we didn't have a huge walkway to paint in. I would have probably made it a few feet bigger if I did it again. Like 20 feet is a good size. Okay, recruiting core painters.
I'll start on that, which is
Okay.
We do either trainings or practice sessions, and so just as activists, we believe that ordinary people should be able to change the world. As arts activists or arts organizers, I believe that ordinary people should create art and make culture. So I'm a huge advocate of that anyone can participate. And some people have more strengths. So some people who feel less skillful or don't like painting as much, we'll get into roles, but they can help maintain and distribute paint and block the streets, that kind of stuff. But and then also maybe there are some people with some art skills who want to step up, and so it's nice to be able to mix those up and let ordinary people do some painting, design, and leading. So we have a combination of masterful artists designing some of our murals. When we do 15 of them in a few weeks on the 29th, we'll have some professional artists design some, and then some people who have never done it before, including high school kids who it's their first time doing anything like this. So, and I think the street muraling lends itself to ordinary people doing it very simply. It's much less daunting than a permanent wall mural. Emily?
Yeah, maybe you could even make your practice mural, you could publicize it either publicly or just within your group that you're working in, maybe like your email list network, and invite people to come. And then folks who show up, who have had a chance to practice, they can be assigned leadership roles for the day of. Or sometimes you just kind of grab people from whatever group you're working with and be like, we need you to help lead our mural. Here's a picture of the design, go. I've also done some spontaneous murals actually, where there aren't many roles assigned in advance because we only decided to do it the day before. And in that case, like the people who start painting at the beginning become leaders by the end, which is kind of a cool thing to see too.
I'll give a couple other quick responses. I haven't used lime wash paint. I believe it's a permanent paint. If anyone has more information, would love to learn about that.
Yeah, I haven't used it either.
And I think Tim will talk more about October 29th. There's a global day of action in the Bay Area. We'll be using fire, ash, and charcoal to paint outside BlackRock, the world's biggest investor in deforestation and climate destruction. And at the same time, a group in Brazil will be doing a street mural using ash paint from the Amazon fires. But I started to say outside, if whatever the climate impact, figure out how can you use water, mud from the floods, you know, and when we gather the ash, we're going to be going to different parts of California and also gathering the stories from the people who are impacted by it, so that the power of using that type of stuff is to tell the story of what happened, why it happened, that kind of thing. Should we move on to roles, Emily?
Let's do it. Yeah, Dana, we were not going to use slides for this section, so we could close the slides again. Also, I don't know if, did someone mention to feel free to move around and take breaks as you need? Because I realized we haven't had a break in a while, but feel free to just get up if you need to. Yeah, so the roles you'll need. Roles are very useful for, yeah, because it's a kind of a complex operation, so you want to break it up so no one person. I've actually been in this role before where I've been like talking to the media, trying to coordinate the mural, talking to security. You don't want that, ideally. You want to break it up. So the first thing you'll need, hold on, I'm going to pull this closer. You want a team of paint baristas. And so they're in charge of holding down the table where they're scooping out paint for folks. And they help a lot with kind of controlling the chaos. So as they're giving people paint, they can also show them the design and make sure everyone with the paintbrush knows the plan. The next thing you want are the outlining team. And so these folks really know what the design is. And their job is to make those circles with the chalk, trace out the letters and all of that. The next team you want are the paint facilitators. I guess I could also mention for numbers of people, you might want maybe you could have one or maybe two or three if it's really big, paint baristas. You might want like 4 or 5 outliners and maybe 4 facilitators. So the facilitators are the ones who are sort of showing people what sections need to be what color, and this kind of keeping a hand on the chaos. Sometimes your outliners and the facilitators can be the same people if you have a more simple mural, but if you have a more complicated mural, you might want to have separate facilitators ready to start telling people where to paint as the outliners keep working on the design. You also will want to have somebody whose job it is to liaise with police and or security if necessary. Police, security, you know, the owner of the building, and kind of, you know, curious passersby and any of those people. And you just need probably just one person to be doing that. And some strategies that a police or security liaison can use are to, number one, if you're using temporary paint, you know, tell the cops or the security it's temporary paint. You can even have a container of the original paint to show them where it says temporary washable paint on it to say, look, this is the paint we're using. Temporary and non-toxic, those are all good words to mention. You can say we're just doing a community art project. It's good to remember that the police liaison's role is actually not a core organizer, it's just a go-between. And so if the cops are saying, okay, you need everyone to leave, you can say, well, I'm not in charge, I'll go talk to the organizers, and you can buy a lot of time by going back and forth. You can also say things like, well, I can't tell people to leave, you know, I'm just the liaison. And that can help diffuse some of the tension too. You can offer to come back and wash off the mural the following week. You can say, oh, don't worry, we're just going to be here for a couple hours, paint the mural, take a photo, and then we'll leave, and that kind of thing. The next role that you want people to be blocking the street if you're painting in a street. And so you can have folks who are like marshals wearing high visibility vests, and you can also have people holding banners. And both of those things make like a clear visual block. So depending on how big your street and your action is, you might want like, I don't know, 10 people? How many do you have, David?
It really depends on how big the street is, whether it's one way or two way.
Yeah.
So we're blocking two major 3-lane streets. So the grandmothers are organizing it, but they'll probably end up getting 30 people, 15 to block each one with traffic cones, banners, and we may even use some mock oil derricks.
Well, I love that you have a team of grandmothers that always block the roads, David. It's great. You'll also want to have a whole team of people whose job it is to document the mural, and don't undervalue the importance of documentation. That's almost as important as painting the mural itself, often, especially if it's temporary. And so you'll want to have a dedicated, at least one dedicated photographer and possibly also a videographer. And you might also want to have a drone photographer if you can find someone with a drone. And maybe also a dedicated person doing a time lapse. Yeah, from a high vantage point. You also might want to have a media liaison / media spokesperson, so you can send out a press release about your mural in advance. So then if media come, that will be the point person. So they can worry about talking to media while everyone else is doing painting and other roles. And you might also want to have a dedicated social media person who's like live tweeting or on Facebook Live or Instagram Live while the mural is happening. And that person could maybe also be in charge of gathering the photos from the photographers as soon as possible after the mural or even during the mural, getting the high quality photos to post as soon as you can, and also to send to the media. You want to add, David?
Sure. When we're well organized, we actually have kind of a plan and timeline about how the photographs will get shared, who will post them on social media. It's great if you can have the photographer or someone working closely with them be able to post them as it happens, but also to collect them and share them later. For drone photographs, we often offer to share them to independent and sometimes even mainstream media who sometimes pick them up. With time lapse, it's actually not that hard. You can, if somebody wants to invest in a GoPro, which is between $150 and $300, you can actually, and a clamp, you can figure out how to do it yourself pretty easily. And we started this training off with a little GoPro of painting a mural outside here. And then, so in a lot of ways, especially for temporary murals, they really live in the documentation, and that's often how we spread and share the stories. Also thinking about a plan for, if your group is into it, for doing mainstream media outreach, sending a press announcement, do follow-up calls, finding out who covers that type of thing and trying to get them out to share it through that. I also, when the mural is finished, I'm a huge advocate of doing a well choreographed group photo, getting everyone behind it, holding up your signs and banners, and on video if you have a song leader or chants. That's often I notice the photos that really become the sort of iconic ones that where you see all your people, all your art. And also to write. We also ask when we do our mural with 15 different folks, we are going to ask each mural team to say a little bit about their mural, and then we're going to share that publicly. Yeah.
Any questions about roles?
And it's great if you can get core people from each team of each role to do a practice with you. And
Yeah.
one thing you can do is you could actually do role play. So while you're painting the mural, you could have the people have the physical banner and practice blockading the street, and who's going to hold each end, who's going to go forward if a car tries to move towards us, or the police liaison. So we often will do a full-on role play from start to finish, and that can be easy if people haven't done that a lot. Any questions or additions? Maybe I can talk a little bit about some of the other elements that we weave in, which is while we're doing the mural, we often also try and bring other art forms. We'll often have a sound system or not, and folks who can lead songs or chants, but it's quite powerful. We're blessed to sometimes have the peace poets, but we also have Thrive Street Choir, other folks. So finding folks who can lead songs, and it's been quite powerful, especially in some rough times in the last couple of years, for people to be painting the street while being able to listen to or actually sing songs together. And it's kind of an amazing space where people are, if you have a lot of people painting and not everyone's not listening or looking, they can be singing, but also having something going on for people who aren't painting or observing or supporting is quite powerful. So thinking about a program, poetry, that type of thing. We did one recently with Colombian and Palestinians, and they did a sort of cross-cultural exchange of songs and dances from both Colombian and Palestinian cultures, because here in San Francisco, the consulates are in the same building. So we actually did a street mural where the Palestinian community did a Palestinian figure and the Colombian did a Colombian figure, and they were sort of high-fiving each other with fists where the two circles overlapped. But yeah, so with dance and music going on throughout as we were painting.
Pat has a question about transportation. Do you have a van that parks in the area, or are people recruited to bring materials and clean up after?
I can talk about we have different sizes of street murals. So first, I've done them in front of the ICE offices with the migrant rights movement, where I just put all the supplies in my backpack. But on the 15th, because we're probably going to be using 100 gallons of paint, I'll be bringing it in my truck and parking nearby. I showed if you have access to a cart, that's great, or a wagon, but otherwise just putting it in sturdy boxes or buckets, bags, whatever works. And something that, you are also confident that when it's all messy, it'll fit back into.
Yeah, I've just put the buckets in the back of a car and put a drop cloth over it, so in case it spills. Yeah. Sometimes it's nice to delegate different people to clean up than the ones who brought the supplies, and then so it kind of rotates. I've never had a cleanup party, but that does sound like a good idea if you have a really big mural.
Mm-hmm. I think we can move on to our next steps. So huge encouragement for everyone here to get themselves skilled in doing street murals. And Emily and I are happy to be a resource people. I think Tim's going to talk about setting up a way we can share our practices, ask questions. And so Emily and I will be a resource people for you if that's helpful going on. I mentioned earlier that Emily helped me put together a manual that basically walks through all the things we says with lots of pictures in a very beautiful layout. Thank you, Claudia Martinez, our designer. And if you could pull the last slide up, Dana, then we'll share the URL from that, and Tim will also go through that. But just encouragement for everyone to think about for the 29th or for other stuff, integrating some element of street mural into it. And it could be as simple as painting a word. It could be as grand as getting multiple groups to do mini murals and taking over a whole city block. It could be as simple as doing a mini chalk mural, or even bring your own fabric. So just to think about what might work for you. But I'm pretty convinced that our movements win when they use arts to tell our story, to inspire people, and to make our actions really vibrant and engaging. So we'll be following you through. We're doing a second, this is actually a 3-part training. This is part 1. In the past, I've done it in person. So we're trying to figure out how do we do it when we're not in person. Part 2 is for you to do a practice mural. And so whether you're planning a street mural or not, huge encouragement to do a practice, share your photos. Tim will tell you where to send them. And then we'll come back and do a second session on the 18th. And we'd like to hear how people's practices went. We'll give some additional tips, share some of what's being planned around the world. Maybe we'll get our friends from Brazil to report on their Amazon ash mural plans. And yeah, I think, Emily, do you have more for next steps or final thoughts before we turn it over to Tim?
I do not, but yeah, good luck. I'm looking forward to see all of your practices.
And the slide that Dana just put up, thank you, is has the link to the street mural manual, which you can either look online where it's got live links, or you can download and print out. And this is just the first 2 pages, or a couple of pages, the cover and the street mural, and it has sort of the steps, a lot of what we walk through with pictures and pictures and sort of instructionals along the way. Tim?
Amazing. I just dropped into the top of the questions document a bunch of links that folks can find. And don't worry as well, I'm going to send everyone an email. There'll be a link to the recording, and then all these links I'll put in the email as well. As David mentioned, the idea is like to practice and to use that as an excuse to try and get the team of people together that can be ready for actually doing this on the 29th. That session's on the 18th, which is a Monday. So thinking about as a next step, what day or when might make a good time to try and get a practice together, whether it's that weekend before, or you need to schedule in another time, enough time to get the supplies together and things. But you'll have the manual so that you've got all the information that's been shared already in this session. And then one easy way that we thought that everyone can kind of be in contact with each other, but also asking questions kind of into the group space, so that David and Emily, I'm sure, would be happy to answer individual questions, but if we can document as many questions as possible in kind of like a public space, then other people can see them and learn from them as well. So there's this questions document that you've all got access to, but I was going to suggest that people join. I've included a link in there as well to a Signal group where people can join that together and can ask questions of each other and of David and Emily as well. If there's very specific things, I'm sure you can, David and Emily, be happy to be in direct contact with folks as well, and you can do that over Signal perhaps too. And yeah, I've also put a document together where, as people have like developed designs and want feedback on designs, or have got or have actually done a practice where you can put details like photos and maybe share some words about where it was and what you did and any questions that came up or things that you learned into that document as well. So there's a designs and kind of photos and practices document. It'd be great if we could populate that with some things, and that will give us some content for the session on the 18th as well. And I think that's pretty much everything for tonight. Like I say, I'm going to follow up with with an email with all the links in so that everyone's got everything in one place as well. Feel free to be in touch, ask questions. I see, Pat, is that a question you've got now or are you waving? Go for it if it's a question.
Oh, hi. Yeah, you had mentioned earlier in the program that you have something planned for the 29th. And then I thought that you also mentioned something for the 15th. So I didn't know if you have, events that you're doing that maybe we could do up here in Portland as well.
Don't know about the 15th, but the 29th is going to be a big global day of action that's mentioned in the document, where folks across the world will be doing actions targeting different financial institutions who are the kind of core funders of the fossil fuel industry, deforestation, human rights abuses. I will include a link to the website where that's kind of being coordinated from in the email that I send to everyone after as well. So there's more information there. I don't know about the 15th. That's a new one to me.
For
David?
those in the US, there will be a week of mass action at the White House from frontline groups all across the country converging on DC called People versus Fossil Fuels. And you can look up that hashtag or website. And so some groups are doing solidarity actions who aren't able to go to DC. So that's US specific, but that will be a lead up to the 29th and the Glasgow Climate Summit. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm dying to see people's street mural practices and then be in the streets together on the 29th.
Thanks so much, David, Emily, Dana in the background for your technical support. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you all soon.
People want to
Bye.
come off mute and wish us farewell. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Are we sticking around?
I don't know if we wanted to do and maybe we can stop the recording now as well.
Oh yeah.